So you might have clicked on this video if you're watching on YouTube because of the inflammatory title. This is titled "God Damn the King?" And that's because recently the UK has suffered the loss of its longest reigning monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, kind of the country's mum, its dear old little grandma. And no matter how you feel about the monarchy, how you feel about some of the hangers-on like Prince Andrew and his Epstein connection, we pretty much all love the Queen. She did years and years of national service. She devolved her political opinions from her public position, and she was an incredible link to generations past. I mean, Churchill was born in the 1800s, for God's sake, and that was the first prime minister that served under her. So it's a pretty incredible amount of history that we've lost. If you'd like to see some of the history that was lost, fictionalized somewhat, as well as factual, Callum did do a video on the website for the Politics of the Crown. So you can see this time gap between Queen Elizabeth coming to power and obviously her bittersweet passing fairly recently. In the aftermath, I've noticed that many so-called conservatives have conferred what I would say is undue amounts of praise by taking their completely justified sentiments of and affections towards the Queen and transferring them straight onto Charles. Now, of course, in our tradition of divine right of kings, we have to give the position of the monarchy, him being King Charles III, some of the respect it deserves. But it's fair to have your reservations as to whether or not Charles will be on our side. And so today I'd like to look at the recent history of our new king, his career as Prince of Wales, and weigh up the arguments as to whether or not we should be optimistic, there is some of that stuff there, or not afraid, but tepid as to whether or not Prince Charles will show the same dignity to the position as his mother did. King Charles now.
It's still getting used to it. For all my life, he's been Prince Charles.
His face isn't on the money yet, that's why. So, I thought we'd just go over some of the quotes from this. We're not going to play the video, but you can watch it in full.
Just to preface it for myself as well, you can be very pro-monarchy as an institution without necessarily supporting everything that the individuals within that institution do. In fact, I would say it's one of the main benefits of a monarchy, as elaborated by Hans Hermann Hoppe, that if the people on top are screwing you over, at least you know who it is explicitly who's screwing you over. Whereas with a democracy and a parliament and such, you often have elements of entrenched bureaucracy who might be pulling some of the strings that you have no accountability.
Yeah, that's what the Republican arguments are majority stupid. Not Republican as in the American Republican Party, but as in voting for a republic in the UK to have a new president rather than the king or queen. And part of the reason is, as we saw with Boris Johnson, you can campaign as being a libertarian and get in and inflict the worst, most totalitarian lockdowns on the country that are completely at odds with your character, and you get ousted anyway.
I can't believe he considered himself a libertarian.
It's laughable, but then he also considers himself a loyal man and was divorced about 3 times. So,
I suppose so.
So some of the quotes from King Charles's address are, "As the Queen herself did with such unswerving devotion, I too now solemnly pledge myself, throughout the remaining time God grants me," which is a little ominous, but he is in his 70s, "to uphold the constitutional principles at the heart of our nation, and wherever you may live in the United Kingdom, or in the realms and territories across the world, and whatever your background or beliefs, I shall endeavour to serve you with loyalty, respect, and love, as I have throughout my life." Now, there's no two ways about it. Whether or not you're sceptical as to how sincere some of what he says is, he is an excellent, eloquent, and very elocutory public speaker. So we can only hope the content of his speech is as lived up to as to what it actually says.
Yeah, I've been enjoying seeing his public appearances recently because he has been coming across, frankly, quite human.
Dignified, he has a lot of decorum.
Dignified, but also human.
We'll see one of those clips very shortly. I just want to continue, there's one more quote from this. Most importantly from this, he says, "My life will of course change. As I take up my new responsibilities, it will no longer be possible for me to give so much of my time and energies to the charities and issues for which I care so deeply. But I know this important work will go on in the trusted hands of others." So I thought we'd look at, just after the good of what we're going to see in a minute, some of the other issues he genuinely does care about. Some of those issues are fantastic. Some of those, not quite so much. So let's look at what he was referring to, shall we? And I'd like to play this brief clip from 3:30, not 2:30, John, if that's possible, to 6:30.
The teachings of the traditionalists should not, in any sense, be taken to mean that they seek, as it were, to repeat the past, or indeed simply to draw a distinction between the present and the past. Theirs is not a nostalgia for the past, but a yearning for the sacred. And if they defend the past, it is because in the pre-modern world, all civilizations were marked by the presence of the sacred. As I understand it, in referring to tradition, they refer to a metaphysical reality and to underlying principles that are timeless, as true now as they have ever been and will be. And by way of contrast, in referring to modernism, they refer to a particular, though false, definition of reality, a particular, though false, manner of seeing and engaging with the world that, likewise, is distinguished not by time, but by its ideology. In an article written in 1983 for the traditionalist journal Studies in Comparative Religion, Professor Nazar put it this way: when we use the term modern, we mean neither contemporary nor up-to-date. Rather, for us, modern means that which is cut off from the transcendent, from the immutable principles which in reality govern all things, and which are made known to man through revelation in its most universal sense. Modernism is thus contrasted with tradition. The latter implies all that which is of divine origin, along with its manifestations and deployments on the human plane, while the former, by contrast, implies all that is merely human and now ever more increasingly subhuman, and all that is divorced and cut off from the divine source. Most especially, therefore, we can see that it is the very timeless quality of these immutable principles of tradition that makes its teaching so timely. For me, the teachings of tradition suggest the presence of a reality that can bring about a reality of integration. And it is this reality that can be contrasted with so much of modernism's obsession with disintegration, disconnection, and deconstruction, that which is sometimes termed the malaise of modernity. Cut off at the root from the transcendent, modernism has become deracinated and has separated itself, and thereby everything that comes within its thrall, from that which integrates, that which enables us to turn towards and reconnect with the divine.
So,
I'll be honest here, you speaking my language.
it's fantastic. It's genuinely the ideal defense of institutions, Christianity, anti-materialism that you would want, hope for, love coming from the mouth of a monarch. I don't think you can get a better articulated rallying against that possible.
If he could be consistent to that kind of ideology and manner of living that he's just put forward there, I would say that you would have a credible argument that we would have a philosopher king.
Exactly, yeah. And I don't think it's even ideological. I think it's...
ideological is the wrong word for it.
I think it's Burkean in the sense of he is appealing to the United Kingdom as a nation of time-worn traditions that are sentiments and experience built on top of one another. And he is talking about modernism with its perpetual living in the present severs us from the respect and gratitude for the sacrifice of our ancestors and what we have to pay forward. And so
it's
if
not
Charles...
hard to see.
Exactly. If Charles can keep that covenant, if he can focus on conservation and beautiful architecture and, as he said, integration, not multiculturalism, you will hear me singing God Save the King from the rooftops, because that's definitely what we need after years of Blair and Blairite Toryism. There's also, as you said, he's been very human recently. We can definitely sympathise with his being in mourning with his mother. We're not going to play this clip, but CBS News tweeted out yesterday, Charles saying, "I can't bear this bloody thing," when trying to write with a fountain pen. We saw him... what was it? I believe it was on Saturday as well, the Saturday just passed, when he was with all of the former Prime Ministers, Penny Mordaunt, signing declarations with his son, and even Nicola Sturgeon in the room for some reason. He knocked the table over, he knocked the inkwell over, he was getting visibly frustrated, and it's because...
You're shooing people away from him, because they seem to be frustrating him, and let's be fair, the man's mother died.
Yeah, and he's still
on
planning...
Thursday.
He's helping plan the funeral arrangements while he's on tour, and he's literally stepped into the job from the moment his mother's passed away. There's no coronation yet, because it's going to be a summer coronation, but he is king. And so, even though he's trained for this job all his life, which is something that people were criticising him for in the tweet thread beneath that, people just whining, of course, they're foreign anti-monarchists.
Well, that doesn't make him not human all of a sudden.
Exactly. You can be tired, irritable. He's also in his mid-70s, so you're going to be a little bit exhausted. And as John suggested when Chris Williamson was on the podcast with Carl, looking at his fingers, occasionally they can look quite bloated, so we don't know if he has any health issues. And obviously, I don't have to agree with the man's lifelong politics to say I hope he's well.
Of course.
I don't want him to kick the bucket all of a sudden, even if I do quite like his son and look forward to his reign as well. So, if we're looking at that as the good of Prince Charles, I unfortunately have to go on to the bad. Let's go first of all to, will he be defender of the faith or defender of faiths? And there's an extract from an interview here. I'll just read it. Prince Charles, when he was prince, said, "I said I would rather be seen as defender of faith all those years ago, because, as I tried to describe, I mind about the inclusion of other people's faiths and their freedom to worship in this country. And it's always seemed to me that, while at the same time being defender of the faith, you can also be protector of faiths. It was interesting that 20 years ago or more I mentioned this, which has been frequently misinterpreted, that the Queen, in her Jubilee address to the faith leaders, said that as far as the role of the Church of England is concerned, it is not to defend Anglicanism and the exclusion of other religions. Instead, the Church has a duty to protect the free practice of all faiths in this country." Now, that doesn't work, I'm afraid, because...
Sadly, experience has definitely shown us that.
Exactly. There are, unfortunately, religions which are ideologically antithetical to the Christian tradition. This country is founded, its monarchy is founded on the Christian tradition, and the amorality and cultural relativity that has been adopted by the Anglican Church, with Justin Welby saying about climate change is caused by the global oppressors, well, that's distanced you from Christian principles and towards the exact kind of socialism that Marx preached when he said that he wanted to dispense with God and have every man revolve around himself with his own true son. It doesn't make any sense. You cannot be so broad a tent that the tenets collapse and fold in and fall on you. And so you have to be, as head of the Anglican Church, and I'm not an Anglican, remember, you have to be defender of the faith.
You're a Catholic.
Yeah, and the Pope's rubbish, so, you know, I'm non-denominational.
You're between worlds at the moment.
Exactly, yeah. I'm the type that doesn't pray on street corners, as Christ himself said. There's also a complaint, his admonishment of the British Empire, the good boys who didn't do nothing, almost. Prince Charles acknowledges the atrocity of slavery as he allows Barbados to become a republic. He was the one that gave the speech as they departed, with Rihanna in the audience, and he said...
Why was Rihanna there?
Because historically, I believe her family are from Barbados.
Well, she's American.
Yes.
As far as I'm concerned.
Yes, as far as facts are concerned. But remember, that didn't stop Marcus Garvey either, did it? Not being actually African. From the darkest days of our past and the appalling atrocity of slavery, which forever stains our history, the people of this island forged their past with extraordinary fortitude. Emancipation, self-government, and independence were your waypoints. Freedom, justice, and self-determination have been your guides. How awkward when Black Lives Matter was the reason they severed from this, even though the majority of their government are black. It's almost an entire, I believe it's actually 100% black government, and most of them are left-wing politicians. And also, as soon as they went to Republic, they went on China's Belt and Road Program. So we've just given them to the clutches of the Chinese. And also another nation we gave to the clutches of the Chinese was in 1997, he oversaw the separation of Hong Kong from the British Empire. And look how that went. And now we've got to take in thousands of Hong Kong refugees.
Well, that's the thing, is that yesterday, yesterday Callum was looking at footage on the podcast of how people in Hong Kong were reacting to the news of the Queen's death, and they were mourning as well.
Yeah.
So, which suggests to me that they don't want to just be a vassal state for China.
Who would?
Exactly.
That's the tragic thing. There's also, speaking of refugees, or asylum seekers, or boat people, with a thing from France 24 here, an exclusive report, Prince Charles slams the UK's Rwanda plan. He said, it's appalling. And in a BBC documentary marking his 70th birthday, seemingly contradictory, Charles said he would no longer make public interviews on political matters once he becomes king. I'm not that stupid, he said. Well, the problem is, if you've got a...
That's fair, at least.
That's great if he continues that.
Wait, I just want to double check. Did he say that it's appalling because it's inhuman to treat them that way, or appalling because that's obviously not going to work?
Inhumanity was what he fell back on, unfortunately. He wasn't very much the get the invaders out mentality, which we would support. I hope he keeps up his promise from 2018 that he's not going to give political interviews, but you have such a storied history of running your mouth that it does give us reservations as to just how dignified you may be in office compared to the stellar example set by your mother. So speaking of undignified appearances politically, let's look at the ugliest parts of his history, shall we? Firstly, we've got our wonderful man behind the camera, John, and as you just alluded to, Callum, at Christmas, covering how the Prince's Trust and the Royal Institution, of which Charles is a patron, worked with valent projects to create psychological profiles for vaccine-hesitant Brits, and then wanted to, quote, establish a YouTube channel which portrays these critics as dangerous super spreaders of disinformation. They funded channels from BreadTube, like PhilosophyTube, funnily enough, directly funding them to make pro-vaccine content.
The great revolutionary philosophy tube.
Yeah, the great monarchist.
Philosophy tube, I'm not paying my rent, you can't make me, in solidarity, was actually getting funding from the Crown itself.
To
Very
promote Big
interesting.
Pharma. As we will talk about in our book club with Louise Perry on
freedom
Friday.
fighters, they.
At time of recording, it'll be on Friday. The actual only capitalist institutions, as Marx mischaracterized free enterprise, the true exploitative capitalist institutions are the ones the leftist defends, which is the Beyond Burger fast food joints, pornography, and pharmaceutical industries. So
Those are very good points.
But nice to see that Charles is furthering that. Speaking of terrible environmental and big corporate schemes, if we go on to the next one. This was during the height of the Omicron variant, the vaccine thing from the last one. At the height of the Omicron variant, Prince Charles was saying that they're spreading misinformation. It's so frustrating to see these nonsense conspiracy theories. Now, bear in mind, this was at the height of the variant, which the vaccine did not prevent transmission. And unfortunately, tragically, lots of people who were in hospital with COVID were double and but they still anyway, and our thoughts goes to those families, but it seems that misinformation was accidentally spread by the king. So, on to the next, Charles's most egregious fault. A golden opportunity. His Royal Highness leads the keynote speech with other leaders on the World Economic Forum's Great Reset at the 2020 Davos conference.
This to me seems very, very contradictory
Yes.
to that original video clip that we were seeing, because the World Economic Forum, the idea of the Great Reset, all of this seems to be exactly the sort of thing that he was railing against in his defense of traditionalism. These are the products of modernity. This is an extension of the modernity project.
This is the thing. Even if he goes and doesn't give political speeches as he promises, it's the places and institutions to which he shows up to and legitimizes by being there as his capacity of king that would lead him to debase the office. And appearing at Davos, the World Economic Forum, is one of those. So I'll just read a little quote. "There is a golden opportunity to see something good from this crisis. Global crises know no borders, and highlight how interdependent we are as one people sharing one planet." He's talking about COVID there. Speaking at the launch of the World Economic Forum's Great Reset on Wednesday, those were the words of His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales on humanity's chance to craft a more sustainable and equitable world in the wake of the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic. He added, "Unless we take action necessary and build in greener and more inclusive, sustainable way, then we will have more and more pandemics." So I don't quite understand how climate policy is meant to prevent a Wuhan lab, but
I don't see the connection between those two sentiments, but okay.
For those unaware of why the World Economic Forum's Great Reset is not just a conspiracy theory, but is actually openly proclaimed terrible policy, we have a little interview I did actually before I joined Lotus Eaters that can summarise it pretty succinctly.
Connor's just plugging himself, don't worry.
New entryways. Well, I just thought this was a nice little crash course.
Are you wearing a turtleneck?
I was there, it was cold.
Right.
I tried not to look like a
All right,
serial killer.
Archer.
Anyway, so just to summarise briefly, the WEF is an unaccountable, unelected organisation funded by billionaires and hedge funds, for those who are monarchists but are outside of our cultural wheelhouse and political wheelhouse when we've spoken about these things before, if you're new to Lotus Eaters. They want to create a scoring system for businesses who can qualify for investment.
No, they have created one and have implemented it in a lot of places.
They haven't rolled it out fully yet, though.
God.
Not everyone signed on to
It
ESGs
can always
just
get
yet.
worse, is what you're telling me. Fantastic.
Exactly. Only if you invest in renewables, appoint women or non-white people as board members despite their qualifications, so to be anti-meritocratic, or donate to campaigns like BLM despite the documented money laundering and legal infighting between the self-avowed Marxist creators. That's the only way you can qualify for backing from the hedge funds to prop you up. It's an insurance scheme against get woke, go broke. So it means that companies are no longer accountable to their consumers. Think things like Unilever or your banks. Then they also want to give you as consumers corporate social credit scores. It's a digital ID and tie it to the digital currencies that people like Rishi Sunak are pushing, which they can inflate or confiscate at will if you say the wrong thing on social media. And we didn't appoint these people. Much like the EU, if you're pro-Brexit, for example, we didn't have any say over our lives, and unlike the monarchy, an institution which has a time-worn tradition, which is as accountable to its people in many respects, because it wants to leave a lasting legacy. It feels beholden to stabilizing the country. These are globalist internationalists with too much money to care about whether or not you're suffering, and your life is just a number on a spreadsheet. So I don't think Charles should be throwing his weight in.
Let's not forget as well, referencing, we've already spoken about one terrible Forbes article today. Let's not forget the article...
Ida Alkins one?
Yes, welcome to 2030. This is from the World Economic Forum contributor. I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better.
Yes, and if you'd like to read more about that, you can obviously go and sign up to the website. We've got lots of videos and articles, including my deep think on the WEF CFGs are the mark of the beast. So there's plenty of information out there, but let's just say Charles should not be legitimizing the World Economic Forum. However, he's continued to do so both at Davos and outside of it. If we go to the next link, the time to act is now. Prince Charles urges businesses to... that was the one after, but I'll talk about this one first. Hashtag the Great Reset from his personal website. Today, through His Royal Highness's Sustainable Markets Initiative and the World Economic Forum, the Prince of Wales launched a new global initiative, the Great Reset. He's just openly taking their name. For over 50 years, His Royal Highness has promoted action for a sustainable future to ensure that the natural assets can endure for future generations. In January 2020, the Prince launched his Sustainable Markets Initiative at Davos, which he calls on communities, businesses, investors, and consumers, see how they're all very closely knit here, to take the urgent and practical steps required to transition to more sustainable practices. All of this from the man who has an Aston Martin which runs on wine and cheese. I'm not joking about that. He's retrofitted the engine to run on wine and cheese.
Right, okay, I'm King Charles.
And he took a jet to obviously get to Davos. So Charles should be speaking about conservation, absolutely. He's done lots of conservation efforts. But he should not be climate catastrophizing and palling around with the global elite if he was sincerely committed to these kinds of things.
Okay, fact check, true.
Exactly. Go to the next one, if you would. The time to act is now. Prince Charles urges businesses to see coronavirus pandemic as a golden opportunity as he launches his Great Reset project to help industries rebuild in a sustainable way. The reason I wanted to do this is because there's a photo of him with Greta Thunberg. Fantastic. The Swedish schoolgirl, who is utterly uninformed, probably doesn't want him to be in his position, and has single-handedly, with her activism, aided in collapsing the European energy grid and funding the Ukraine war. Lovely.
I will do one thing here, and I'm going to be stretching to be as fair as possible.
Please do.
Which is that in the position that you are in as the prince of a country or now the king of a country, the likelihood is if you go to these sorts of organisational meetings like the World Economic Forum, people will just ask you for a photo, or photographers will sort of shoo you into these pens where you will be asked to take photos with people. So, but at the same time, he was still at
Of
the
course,
World
but if they're
Economic Forum.
rhetorically identical, then one may presume that he agrees with Greta, unfortunately.
Certainly, potentially.
Yes. If we go to the next one, just from The Guardian, the pandemic is a chance to reset the global economy, says Prince Charles. He promotes a circular bioeconomy. So you're familiar with the donut economics, aren't you? Proposed by an Oxford academic that the UN then seized on to do their 17 Sustainable Development Goals.
Sadly, yes, and sadly my prescience of the future is seeing us do a book club on her ridiculous donut economics
We
book.
should do something on ESGs and donut economics very soon, yes, because it's very important. But for those that don't know, the donut economy is, as you would presume, a donut. On the outside of it, things we can't control. In the ring is all these social goals and environmental goals like sustainability, recycling, equity, gender inclusion, all which aren't hierarchically ranked, so we're meant to pursue them all at the same time. So that's a bad economic and policy making idea 101. In the middle, there's this hole of things that are like a shortfall, like waste, like inequality, like crime. And what we want to do is close the whole of the donut to make it a fixed pie. Who divides the pie? Number one, the idea is the socialist misconception that economics are fixed and can be equitably divisible, which is never the case. And number two, it doesn't account for the fact that things are always entropic. People are flawed, and even the people in power may not be pursuing the right ideals, they may not have accurately calculated them, or any state commissar can't accurately describe prices or exactly what people need or want, so you're just going to have a lot of suffering and a lot of indifference, and the global elite are just going to amass a lot of power at your expense, and do, as Yuval Noah Harari said at the World Economic Forum, they're going to become digital Stalins and erase the class of useless eaters. Again, King Charles III now, Your Majesty, don't throw your lot in with these people, please.
Please.
Yes. Okay.
Your duty is to the faith and the English people.
Yes, and if you do more of the traditionalist speak, we'll be delighted. So, I would like to finish with the sentiment of Dominique Samuels, who is frequently on GB News. She's a really lovely girl, actually. I won't be saying God save the king until I'm given a reason to, I'm afraid. And that's where I stand. I can respect the institution to the highest of heavens. I really had the utmost admiration for the Queen. I thought Prince Philip was hilarious as well. His repeated congressional addresses. He visited Scotland and China within a hair's breadth of each other quite a few years ago, and both times the only interview he gave was when they went, "Oh, how did you find your trip, Your Majesty?" And for both places he said ghastly and just got in the car. Fantastic.
Oh, I miss Philip so much.
I can respect many people of the royal family, Andrew aside, of course, but I would hope King Charles clings more to patriotic Englishness, just as his mother did, than the globalist internationale, which are, I'm not bothered about unaccountability, but just have evil intent for us. I would rather he be an elite on our side. And Your Majesty, if you're somehow listening, please give me a reason to like you, because I'm really hoping you do.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the Contemplation series, this one on sneaky journalists, and their rhetorical tricks. You want to follow what else Josh is putting out? You can follow him on Getter at Josh_firm on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.